You lost? No, ma'am.
Your windmill's throwing its gear. You hear that knock under the turn?
I hear it.
I'll set it right by dark. Supper in a corner of your barn. Nothing more.
Samuel!
Are you the man Mama's scared about?
No. Though I've been the man plenty of folks feared. Doesn't take much.
There's a plate. You wash before you sit at my table.
The rope had opened his palm sometime before noon, and he had not stopped to notice. Elias Kade stood in the doorway of the Whitfield Mercantile with his hat sweated dark at the band, and the whole store went quiet the way a field goes quiet before weather. A woman drew her child closer. The storekeeper set down his pencil. Nobody said his name out loud, but he could feel it moving from mouth to ear behind him, the way his name always moved now, low, careful, like something you did not want to wake. He had walked into 100 towns like this one. He knew the sound of a story arriving before he did. And the worst part, the part that turned his stomach against the counter, was that the story they whispered was not even his. It was a borrowed thing, stitched to his back by strangers. He set down 2 coins for flour and waited to be refused. He was not refused exactly. The storekeeper took the coins with 2 fingers, the way a man takes a thing he means to wash his hands of, and gave back the sack without meeting his eyes. That was fine. Elias had learned to eat off silence. He tucked the flour under his arm, touched his hat to no one in particular, and stepped back out into the autumn gold of 1879, into a Kansas afternoon so bright and so cold at once that the light seemed to come off the wheat stubble like something spilled. The whole country had turned the color of a lion's hide. Grass gone from green to brass. Cottonwoods along the creek shedding coins of yellow into the water. The sky scrubbed hard and blue above it all. He had ridden through prettier land. He had never ridden through emptier. A man could disappear out here, and the prairie would not so much as blink. That, more than anything, was why he had come. On the north road, where the ruts ran deep and the fence posts leaned like tired men, a farm sat against the horizon with its shoulders down. Elias saw it before he meant to. A low house, a leaning barn, a windmill turning slow and complaining in a wind that smelled of cold iron. That particular smell that comes into the air a day or two before the first hard frost, when the ground itself seems to breathe out metal. He had smelled it in a dozen falls. It always meant the same thing. Winter was counting the house, and the house was coming up short. He did not know yet that the house belonged to a woman named Ruth Ammons. He did not know that she was, at that hour, on her knees in the sorghum patch with her sleeves shoved past the elbow, feeding cane into a press that reeked green and sweet and rotting all at once, her back aching in a place that never fully stopped aching now. He did not know that she was 29 years old and had been a widow for 2 of them, or that the women of the town had a name for a woman like her, leftover, and used it kindly, which was the cruelest way to use it. He only saw the farm going under, and he was a man who could not, to save his own life, walk past a thing that was drowning. Ruth heard the wagon on the road and did not look up. Wagons on the road meant one of 3 things, and she had no use for 2 of them. If it was the Reverend come to pray over her circumstances, she would give him coffee and let him leave feeling better than she did. If it was Marcus Pel come about the note on the land, she would meet him standing, and if it was neither, it was a stranger, and strangers did not stop. This one stopped. She wiped her hands down her apron and stood, and there was a moment, she would remember it later, would turn it over like a stone she'd carried in her pocket, when she saw him and he saw her, and neither of them arranged their faces in time. He saw a woman worn to the grain and still upright in it, brown hair coming loose at the temple, hands stained green from the cane, a woman who did not shrink at the sight of a hard-looking man in her yard. She saw a stranger with a wound on his hand he'd forgotten, and a shadow behind his eyes he had not. "You lost?" she said. "No, ma'am." His voice was lower than she expected, and it went careful when it hit the word ma'am, the way a man's voice goes careful when he has not been given many soft words to say lately. Your windmill's throwing its gear. You hear it? That knock under the turn. She had heard it. She had lain awake to it. She had no money to answer it. I hear it, she said. I can set it right in an afternoon. I'm asking for supper and a corner of that barn tonight. Nothing more. He paused. You don't have to feed me if the work's no good. Behind Ruth, the door of the house banged, and a boy came out at a dead run. 6 years old, all knees and cowlick. A boy who had not yet learned that the world was a thing to be afraid of. Sam Ammons pulled up short at his mother's hip and stared at the stranger with the frank, bottomless attention of a child. Are you the man Mama's scared about? Sam asked. Samuel, said Ruth. No, Elias said, and got down off the wagon slow, so the boy could watch every part of it. I don't believe I am. Though I've been the man, plenty of folks were scared about. Doesn't take much. Ruth looked at him a long moment, cold iron in the air, and the light going long and gold across the yard, and the windmill knocking its bad tooth over and over above them all. She had $1.40 in a tin behind the stove, and a note coming due she could not pay, and a boy who needed shoes before the snow. She had learned, hard, to weigh every kindness for its cost. But she had also learned that a woman who turns away every hand because some hands have struck her ends up with nothing to hold. There's a plate, she said. You wash before you sit at my table. That was how Elias Kade came to the Ammons place, not with a flourish, with a knock in a windmill, and a plate of beans, and a boy who was not afraid of him. He fixed the gear before dark. He did it right, too. She watched him from the porch, watched the way he worked, and a woman who has buried one husband and been raised by a hard father knows the difference between a man showing off and a man who simply cannot leave a broken thing broken. Elias was the second kind. He climbed down greasy to the elbow, and the windmill turned clean and quiet, and something in Ruth's chest that had been clenched for 2 years loosened one notch. Just one, and she did not thank him for it because she did not trust it yet. Supper was beans and cornbread and the last of the fall greens. Elias ate like a man who had trained himself not to look hungry. Sam talked enough for the table and then some, and Ruth let him, because the sound of her boy chattering to a grown man was a sound this house had been starving for. When Sam asked where he was from, Elias said, "West of here." When Sam asked where he was going, Elias said, "East, I expect." And Ruth caught the small lie in it and let that go too, because everyone out here was running from a west or toward an east, and it was rude to ask which. She gave him the barn and a horse blanket and told him the coffee would be on before light. He touched his hat. In the dark of the barn, lying in clean straw with his boots by his head, Elias Kade listened to the windmill he had fixed turn quiet and true, and for the first time in a long while, did not feel like a thing the country was trying to shake off. He should have gone in the morning. He knew it. A drifter with a story on his back does not linger where a widow and her boy might catch the splash of it. He told himself he would fix the barn door hinge and go. Then he saw the fence line down along the South 40 and told himself he would restring that and go. Then the first hard frost came in the night, right on the smell of it, and turned the whole world to silver glass. And Ruth came out at dawn to find him already splitting wood, his breath smoking, the stack grown by half, and she stood in the doorway with a chipped enamel cup in her hand, and the steam torn sideways off the coffee by the cold, and she did not tell him to go either. Days have a way of adding to themselves. By the end of that first week, the barn door swung true, the fence held, the woodpile stood tall enough to argue with winter, and Elias had not asked for a cent. Ruth tried to press coins on him, and he would not take them. "I'm eating your food," he said. "That's the wage." She looked at him hard. A man who works for nothing wants something he won't say. He didn't flinch. "Maybe he just wants to be somewhere," he said, "where nobody's counting," and that was as near to the truth as either of them came for a while. There was a rhythm to it that neither named. He rose early and she rose earlier. He did the heavy work and she ran the house and the hens and the last of the garden, and between them the farm began, slowly, to stand back up. Sam followed Elias like a burr. Elias taught him to whittle a whistle, and to gentle the old plow horse, and to spit properly off the top rail of the fence, which earned Elias a look from Ruth that had a laugh hiding somewhere far down inside it. And there were the small things, the cracks where warmth got in. One evening Ruth came in from the well. The well water had gone briefly foul, sulfur tasting, the way prairie wells will when the water table shifts, and she'd been fretting it, and found that Elias had dug down and cleared the seep, and packed the wall with fresh clay, and the water had come sweet again, and he'd said nothing, had let her discover it, and she'd stood at the pump tasting clean water, and had to turn away so he would not see her face. Another time she found her husband's coat, which she had not been able to bring herself to throw out or to wear, mended at the shoulder where the moths had been at it, mended plain and careful, no word said. She stood a long while holding it. She did not know how to feel about a stranger's hands doing gently what her dead man's hands had done. In the end, she hung it back on its peg and left the strangeness alone with it. He never crossed a line. That was the thing she came to understand about Elias Kade. He was a big man with a hard past, and there was not one moment she feared him. And she had feared men her whole life on some low animal level, so this was new to her, this ease, and she distrusted it the way you distrust warm weather in February. When they worked side by side, there was a foot of air between them always, an honest foot, and she found herself, some days, resenting that foot, and then being ashamed of resenting it. The town did not stay ignorant long. Nothing stays private out where the roads are straight and the eyes are hungry. It began with the Reverend Hollis Tandy came out on a Tuesday in his black coat, with his Bible on his knee, and his mouth full of concern, and he sat at Ruth's table and drank her coffee, and got to the point the long way around, the way such men do. "A woman alone," he said, "in her situation, must guard her name as her only fortune." "I've a farm and a boy," Ruth said. "That's my fortune. My name I keep in my own house." Tandy set down the cup. "Sister Ammons, the man you've taken on, do you know who he is?" "I know he fixed my windmill and my well and my fence, which is more than the church did after Tom died." That landed. She saw it land. But Tandy was not a cruel man, only a frightened one, frightened for her in the way that does more harm than plain cruelty. And he leaned in and told her the story that walked in front of Elias Kade. They said he had killed a man down in the Nations. They said there had been a fire and a family, and that Elias Kade had walked away from ashes with money that was not his. They said it low, and they said it sure, the way a story is always said sure, once it has traveled far enough from the truth to be safe. "I do not say it to wound you," Tandy said. "I say it because you have a child under your roof." Ruth walked the Reverend to his buggy and thanked him for his trouble and watched him drive off into the gold, and then she stood in her yard a long time, and out at the fence line Elias went on stringing wire as though he did not know exactly what had been said, though of course he knew. He always knew. A man wears a story long enough, he can feel it enter a room. That evening, she did not ask him. She thought she would, and then she looked at his hands, at the wound on his palm, gone to a pink seam now, at the way he cut Sam's meat small without being asked, and she found she did not want the answer badly enough to break the peace to get it. So she said nothing, and her silence was its own kind of thing between them, and he heard it, and something in him closed a fraction, because he had wanted, God help him, to be asked. The barn is where it finally came apart into words. It was near dusk, the light coming amber through the gaps in the boards, dust turning gold in it, the smell of hay and horse and cold iron. She had brought him a plate out because Sam was already asleep, and she did not want to sit across a table from a silence any longer. He took it and did not eat. "You heard what the Reverend brought," she said. "I heard it arrive." He set the plate on a barrel. "I've heard it in a lot of places. It rides faster than I do. Is it true?" She had not meant to ask. It came out of her plain and level, and she could not take it back, and did not want to. Elias looked at her, and for a moment she saw the whole weight of it in him, the thing that made him move on before any town could learn to like him. Some of it's true, he said. "None of it's true, the way they tell it. And I've stopped explaining, because a man who explains his innocence sounds guiltier every word." He picked up his hat and turned it in his hands. "You want me gone? I'll go tonight. No hard feelings. You've got a boy to think of." Ruth stood in the barn door with the last light behind her. Everything sensible in her said send him down the road. Every voice she had ever been taught to obey said it. "The wire's not finished," she said. That was all. But it was everything, and he knew it, and he set the hat back down. "No," he said, "it's not. Now let me tell you about the man who held the note on Ruth Ammons's land. His name was Marcus Pel, and he was the most respectable man in the county, and that was precisely what made him dangerous. He did not carry a gun. He carried a ledger. He wore a clean collar to church every Sunday, and put a good coin in the plate, and shook the reverend's hand. And then on Monday, he foreclosed on his neighbors with the same untroubled face he wore to prayer. He had bought up half the notes in 3 townships. He was patient, the way rot is patient. He did not need to hurry. Time and weather did his cruelty for him, and left his hands clean. Ruth owed him on the land. Tom had borrowed against it the spring before he died, to buy seed and a second mule. And then Tom had died under an overturned wagon, and left Ruth with the debt and the boy and the ground. And Pel had been very kind about it at the funeral, and very kind every quarter since, and his kindness was the kind that closes slowly, like a hand. Elias met him for the first time on a bright, cold market day in town. Ruth had gone in to sell eggs and the last of her sorghum, and Elias had driven her, and Pel came across the street in his clean collar with 2 men a step behind him, and stopped at the wagon and looked at Elias the way a man looks at a coin he suspects is bad. "You're the one working the Ammons place," Pel said. "Not a question." "I am." "There's a great deal said about you." "There is," Elias agreed. "Most of it saves folks the trouble of asking me anything." Pel smiled. It did not reach anywhere near his eyes. "A widow's reputation is a fragile thing, Mr. Kade. She would do well to think of it, and of her note, which comes due at the new year." He touched his hat to Ruth, all courtesy. "Mrs. Ammons, my regards." He walked on, but in the moment he'd stood there, Elias had seen the corner of the ledger under his arm, seen the ranked columns of names and figures, and something in the sight of it snagged at him and would not come loose. He could not have said why, then. He only knew that Marcus Pel was a man who kept his cruelty in a book, and that a book can be read. The weeks tightened toward winter. There was a stretch in there. Ruth would think of it, after, as the good weeks, when the farm and the 3 of them found a kind of grace together. The killing frosts came, and the world went stark and lovely. Elias butchered the hog and smoked it, and filled the little smokehouse, so that for the first winter in 3, Ruth would not lie awake doing sums against hunger. He mended Sam's boots, and then, when he found how far gone they were, he traded a day's labor to the cobbler for a new pair, and gave them to the boy without ceremony, and Sam wore them to bed the first night, and Ruth stood in the doorway of her son's room watching him sleep in his new boots, and had to press her hand to her mouth. There was an evening at Delphia's. Delphia Wren was the one woman in the county who had never once called Ruth leftover, an old friend, sharp-tongued and warm-hearted, married to a man half her sense and twice her patience, and she had them all to supper one night, Ruth and Sam, and, after a look between the women that said everything, Elias too. And at Delphia's table, in the lamplight, with Delphia's children and Sam thundering underfoot, and the men talking low about weather and cattle, Ruth looked down the table at Elias, laughing at something Delphia's husband said, laughing easy, his hard face gone open for one unguarded moment, and she felt her heart do a thing it had promised itself it would never do again. Delphia saw it. Of course Delphia saw it. She got Ruth alone by the wash basin, and dried her hands slow and said, "You know what you've got out there. I've got a hired man. Ruth Ammons, I have known you since we were girls, and I watched you marry a good man you did not love because your daddy told you to, and I watched you bury him and never once cry where anyone could see, and I am telling you," she hung the towel, "that man out there looks at you like you're the first warm thing he's found in 10 years of cold. Don't you send him off on account of what small men say. There's a boy to think of. There's a boy in there, wearing new boots that stranger bought him, Delphia said. Think of that boy. Ruth did not answer, but she carried the words home in her chest like a coal. It could not last, of course. Good weeks never announced their ending. It came in the form of paper. 2 days before the year turned, Marcus Pel drove out to the Ammons place himself, in a fine buggy, with the sheriff beside him for the look of the law, and he handed Ruth a folded notice, and she took it, and her hands knew before her eyes did. The paper was soft, worn soft as cloth from being folded and unfolded, and she understood that he had carried it a long time, had taken it out and looked at it, and folded it away again, savoring it, waiting for the day. The note was called, "Not at the New Year, now." There was a clause, he explained, in his patient, church-going voice, a clause about the maintenance of the property, about the presence of persons of ill repute upon the land, about the security of his investment. He was so sorry. She had 30 days, unless of course she could pay in full, which they both knew she could not. And then he looked past her, at Elias splitting wood by the barn, and he let the look linger, and he said, gently, so gently, "A woman is known by the company she keeps. Mrs. Ammons, I did try to warn you." He drove off. The sheriff would not meet her eyes. The buggy went small and black across the gold-gone gray winter land, and Ruth stood in her yard with a paper soft as cloth in her hand, and the whole floor of her life gone out from under her. That night was the worst of it. Elias came in when she called him, and she put the notice on the table between them, and she did not weep, because she had long ago misplaced the trick of it, but she was closer than she had been in 2 years, and Elias read it, and his jaw went to iron, and he understood in one blow what she understood, that it was him, that his presence, the thing he had thought was helping, was the very knife Pel had needed, that the story riding in front of him had finally caught the people he'd tried to shield. "This is on me," he said, low. "Pel's using me to take your land. Respectable man, ruining a widow. He can't do that cleanly. But a widow harboring a man with a dark reputation, that he can dress up pretty enough to do it clean. You don't know that. I know men like Pel. I've been what men like Pel needed to hand my whole life." He stood up from the table so hard the chair scraped. "I ruin the ground I stand on, Ruth. I always have. I told myself this time was different. It's never different." He was already reaching for his coat on the peg. His own coat. "I'll ride out tonight. I'm gone. The reason's gone. Maybe he lets up. Maybe the Reverend speaks for you if I'm not in the picture. So you'll run. I'll do the one useful thing I know how to do." "That's not useful. That's easy." Her voice cracked at last, and she hated that it did, and she went on anyway. "You've got a habit of leaving before you can be sent off. You call it protecting folks. I call it not trusting a single soul to choose you. You'd leave my boy without a word, so you don't have to stand still and find out if he'd have kept you." That stopped him with the coat half on. She had reached all the way in and found the true thing, and it hurt him more than any story the town told. "You don't know what I've done," he said. "Quiet. Then tell me. For once in your life, tell somebody, instead of running so they can fill in the blank however they please." But he couldn't. The words were locked so deep in him, he'd have needed to be a different man to reach them. He stood there a moment with his face working, and then he shook his head, and he took his coat the rest of the way on, and he went out into the black cold, and Ruth heard the barn door and the horse, and she sat alone at her table, with a paper soft as cloth, and a cold cup of coffee, and the whole silent house pressing down on her, and upstairs her boy slept in his new boots, not knowing that the man who bought them was riding away. She did not sleep. Toward the deepest part of the night she lit the lamp and did the only thing left to a woman with no money and no man and a farm going under. She went through everything, every drawer and box, hunting for anything, a deed, a paper, a claim, some forgotten dollar, some way to fight. And in doing it, she pulled down from the top of the wardrobe a bundle of Elias's things he'd left behind, meaning to send for them, or meaning never to think of them again. And among his few possessions, wrapped in oilcloth, worn soft at the folds the same terrible way Pel's notice was worn soft, she found the ledger. Not Pel's ledger, his own. It was a small book, and it was full of Elias Kade's cramped, careful hand. And it was a record of debts, but not debts owed to him. Debts he had paid. Page after page, town after town, year after year. A widow's back rent in Missouri, paid anonymous. A boy's doctor in the nations. A family's passage west after a fire took their farm. A fire, she read, her heart stopping. A fire he had run into, not from. A fire he'd pulled 2 children out of, and carried the burn scars on his own back that she'd wondered at. And the money the town said he'd stolen from the ashes was money he had given, his own money, to bury their dead and start the living over. And the man he'd killed, she found it near the end. In the plainest words, a man who had been beating a woman badly in a saloon in the nations. And Elias had pulled him off, and the man had drawn, and the struggle had ended badly for the man, and no one else, and the woman had lived, and her name was in the book too, with money sent to her every year since. He had spent his whole life quietly paying off a debt he did not owe, because he could not carry the weight of a world that hurt the weak, and the world had thanked him by naming him a killer and a thief, and running him from every town he tried to heal. Ruth Ammons sat on the floor of her cold house with that book open in her lap, and finally, 2 years late and all at once, she wept. And then she got up, and she washed her face, and by the gray of dawn she had made up her mind. She did not go looking for Elias. She trusted, she chose to trust, that a man does not clear a widow's well, and mend a dead man's coat, and buy a boy's boots, and then ride so very far, so very fast. She thought he'd have got as far as the creek crossing and no farther. She thought he'd be sitting his horse somewhere out in that cold country, arguing with himself. She was right, but she did not go to him first. She went to town. She went to town on market day, with Sam beside her and the oilcloth bundle under her arm, and she walked into the mercantile where the whole story had started. And she waited until the room was full, until Pel was there in his clean collar, and the Reverend was there, and the women who said leftover kindly were there. And then Ruth Ammons, who had spent 2 years keeping her name quiet in her own house, spoke up in a public place for the first time in her life. "You've all got a story about the man working my farm," she said, and the room went to that same weather quiet it had gone to the day Elias walked in. "I've got the truth of it here, in his own hand, and I mean to read it, and then you can go on saying whatever you like, but you'll do it knowing." And she read it. Not all of it. She read the fire, and the 2 children, and the scars. She read the woman in the saloon. She read the widow's rent and the boy's doctor. She read the name of the man he was supposed to have murdered, and what that man had been doing when the struggle ended. She read in a plain, steady voice while the store stood silent, and the Reverend's face went from doubt to something like shame, because he was not a cruel man, only a frightened one, and here was a thing to be more frightened of than a stranger, the discovery that you have helped the world do a wrong. When she finished, the silence held, and into it, Ruth turned and looked at Marcus Pel, who had gone very still with his ledger under his arm. "You called my note 2 days early," she said, "under a clause about persons of ill repute. There's no ill repute here, but the story you've been glad to use. I don't expect you'll care, but these folks will." She looked around the room. "Marcus Pel holds paper on half of you. He's foreclosed on the Ostranders and the Vaughts and old Mrs. Petrie, and he did it legal, and he did it kind, and now he's doing it to me, and he's using a lie about a good man to do it. I can't stop him with money. I haven't got any, but I can make sure that when he takes my land, every one of you knows exactly the kind of Christian did it. It was not a courtroom. Nothing was decided by law that day, but there are things stronger than law in a small place, and one of them is shame, and another is the sudden turning of neighbors' faces. And Marcus Pel stood in that mercantile and felt the room turn against him for the first time in his patient, rotten life, felt his respectability, the only thing he had ever truly owned, come loose at the seam. The Reverend was looking at him. The women were looking at him, and Pel was a coward, as such men always are under the collar. and he could read a room going bad the way Elias could read a story arriving. "There's been," Pel said, and his voice was not quite steady. "There may have been an error. In the dating of the note, the clause may not apply. We can revisit the terms in the spring." "You'll strike the clause," said the Reverend, quietly, finding at last some use for his authority. "And you'll give the woman till the year's harvest, Marcus. And you'll do it in front of witnesses. And then perhaps we'll all pray on the other matters Mrs. Ammons has raised." Pel struck the clause. He did it with a face like a man swallowing glass. And he did it in front of witnesses. And Ruth got her 30 days turned into a year. A whole year, to bring in a crop and pay honest. And it was not victory exactly, but it was ground to stand on. And a woman who has had the floor go out from under her knows the worth of ground to stand on. She walked out of the mercantile into the cold gold noon, with her boy's hand in hers, and the oilcloth book under her arm. And she did not feel triumphant. She felt scraped clean. She had one thing left to do, and it frightened her more than facing Pel had. He was at the creek crossing. Of course he was. He was sitting his horse on the near bank with the water running thin and clear over the stones and the cottonwoods bare above him. And he had been sitting there since before dawn, not able to cross and not able to come back. And when he saw the wagon coming, he went stiff in the saddle, like a man bracing for a blow. Ruth stopped the wagon. She got down. Sam started to scramble after her, and she said, "Stay." And for a wonder, he stayed. She walked to Elias across the cold ground with the book in her hand, and she held it up. "You left this," she said. His face did something then, something that had been held down so long it had forgotten how to move. "You read it. Every page. Twice." She was crying again, and she let him see it this time. "You've been paying for the whole world's cruelty out of your own pocket for 10 years, Elias, and letting it call you a killer, and running before anybody could catch you being good. You've never once let a soul choose you. So I'm going to do it standing here, and you're going to hold still and let me." She took a breath. "I told the whole town the truth of you this morning. I read your book out loud in the mercantile with Pel standing there. He gave me back my year. The Reverend made him. It's done." Elias got down off the horse slowly, like a man moving through deep water, and he stood in front of her, and he could not speak. "You said you ruined the ground you stand on," Ruth said. "You stood on mine 4 months. My well runs sweet. My boys got boots. My winters smoked and hung. My name I read out loud in front of God and everybody, and it held. That's not ruin, Elias. That's the only building this place has seen since Tom died." She reached out, she, who had feared men her whole life, who had kept a careful, honest foot of air between them all these weeks, and she took his hand, the one with the pink seam across the palm, where the rope had opened it the first day, and she held it in both of hers. "It's never too late to be found, but you've got to hold still long enough to let it happen." He looked down at their hands. The creek ran. The wind came cold off the stubble with that iron smell that means hard weather, and it did not matter, because the two of them were standing still at last, both of them. The running finally stopped. "I don't know how to stay," he said. It was the truest and hardest thing he had ever admitted to a living soul. "I know," said Ruth. "I'll teach you. I'm slow at it myself." They rode back to the farm together, the three of them in the wagon, Sam between them talking a blue streak, not understanding a thing that had happened, and understanding all of it, the way children do. That winter, Elias Kade stayed. He did not stay as a hired man. He stayed the slow way, the earned way, the way that Ruth needed and could trust. A foot of honest air, narrowing over weeks to nothing. A courtship measured in mended fences and shared coffee, and the boys' laugh filling a house that had gone silent too long. The town came around as towns do, faster than they'd turned away, because folks who have done a wrong are eager to be seen doing a right. The Reverend himself, humbled, spoke Elias's true story from the pulpit one Sunday, and the women who had said leftover found other words. Marcus Pel went quiet in his big clean house, his patience finally exposed for the rot it was, watching his notes come due, in a county that no longer tipped its hat to him. "There is one more thing to tell, and it is the smallest thing, and it is the whole of it. Late that winter, on an evening when the snow came down soft and the lamp was lit and the smell of the good smoked meat was in the house, Elias came in from the barn and hung his coat on the peg by the door. The peg that had stood empty 2 years. The peg where a good man's coat had hung once and then not, and where now, worn to it, belonging to it, a coat hung again. He hung his hat above it, and Sam, at the table, working the whistle Elias had carved him, looked up at the sound of the door, and the word that came out of the boy was not the man or the stranger or, "Hey, mister." "Elias?" Sam said, just his name. Easy, the way a child says the name of someone who is simply, permanently there. "Elias, is it snowing enough to sled yet?" And Elias Kade, who had ridden away from 100 towns before any of them could learn to say his name kindly, stood in a warm doorway in Kansas with his hat on the peg above a dead man's empty place made full again, and heard a child say his name like it was the most ordinary word in the world, like it was a thing that would be said tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. "Not yet," he said, when he could speak. "Come spring, we'll build you a proper one." Come spring. He had said, come spring. He had spoken of a season he meant to be there for. Ruth at the stove heard it and did not turn around, and smiled into the steam torn sideways off the chipped enamel cup, and let the moment be what it was. It is never too late to be found. You have only to hold still, in a warm doorway, and let someone say your name.